1944, Yugoslavia. A small team of British commandos is pinned down on a rocky island in the Adriatic Sea. German forces surround them. A mortar shell hits, then another. One by one, the soldiers go down, killed or wounded. When the smoke clears, one man is still standing. He's out of ammunition. He's outnumbered. He's surrounded. So he sits down and plays the bagpipes. This is the true story of Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill. You've never heard of him. History forgot him, and that might be the most insane part of this entire story. John Churchill was born in 1906 in British Ceylon, what we now call Sri Lanka. His father was a colonial engineer. His family was old Oxfordshire stock, long tradition of military service. On paper, he was born to be a soldier, but the kind of soldier Jack Churchill wanted to be hadn't really existed since about 1415. He trained at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, the British equivalent of West Point, and was commissioned into the Manchester Regiment in 1926. He spent his early years stationed in Burma, riding his motorcycle across the Indian countryside and teaching himself to play the bagpipes. He was not Scottish. He just liked bagpipes. This is important context for everything that follows. By the mid-1930s, peacetime soldiering had bored him completely, so he quit, moved to Nairobi, Kenya, became a newspaper editor. Then, because why not, he became a professional male model, then a film extra in London. He appeared in 2 films, The Thief of Baghdad and A Yank at Oxford. He also, during this period, took up archery seriously enough to represent Great Britain at the World Archery Championships in Oslo in 1939. Let that settle for a moment. This man, former soldier, newspaper editor, male model, film extra, is also competing internationally with a longbow. The year after Oslo, the Second World War begins. Jack Churchill looks at the news. He looks at his bow. He looks at his broadsword, a Scottish basket-hilted claymore he'd been carrying around for years on the grounds that, quote, any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. He rejoins the army. He packs the bow. He packs the sword. He packs the bagpipes. The Germans have tanks. They have artillery. They have the Luftwaffe. Jack Churchill has a medieval weapons collection and zero concern about any of that. May 27, 1940. The British Expeditionary Force is in full retreat through northern France. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers are falling back toward the beaches of Dunkirk, one of the largest military disasters in British history, soon to become one of its greatest evacuations. It is not a glorious moment for most soldiers. Captain Jack Churchill is positioned on a hillside near the French village of L'Épinette, near Richebourg, with 2 infantrymen. They watch the enemy advance across an open field below them. 5 German soldiers appear. They're less than 30 yards away. Churchill reaches for his longbow. He draws, he aims, he shoots the German sergeant through the chest. The man falls dead from an arrow. In 1940, in the middle of a mechanized world war, it is the only confirmed longbow kill of the entire Second World War. Possibly the last longbow kill in any major conflict in recorded modern history. Churchill won the Military Cross for his actions at Dunkirk. The citation does not specifically mention the bow and arrow. History has a way of smoothing over its strangest edges. But the legend of Mad Jack Churchill had begun. Now, at this point in the story, a reasonable man might think, all right, the longbow was a one-time thing, a dramatic gesture, a moment of eccentricity in an otherwise conventional military career. You would be wrong. Jack Churchill was just getting started. By 1941, Churchill had joined the Commandos, Britain's elite special operations force, trained for raids, sabotage, and hitting the enemy hard and fast, behind their own lines. It was, in other words, exactly the kind of warfare that suited a man who brought medieval weaponry to a world war. His standard equipment on a raid: longbow, quiver of arrows, claymore sword, and bagpipes. He did not consider any of these items optional. In Norway, Churchill led commando raids on German-occupied positions. His method of inspiring his men was unconventional. As the boats hit the shore, he would stand at the bow, the front of the boat, not his weapon, though he had that too, and begin playing the bagpipes at full volume while sailing straight into enemy fire. Fellow commandos described the effect on the Germans as somewhere between confusion and terror. Churchill described it as good for morale, his morale presumably. In Sicily, in 1943, the Allies were pushing through the island toward mainland Italy. One evening, Churchill decided that the German camp nearby needed attending to. He took one corporal. Together, the two of them crept through the darkness, moving silently from German post to German post. When they encountered soldiers, Churchill, holding his claymore, made clear that resistance was not a survivable option. By morning, he and his corporal returned to camp. With them, 42 German prisoners, 1 mortar crew, and their weapons. 42 prisoners, 1 sword, 1 corporal. When asked about it later, Churchill was characteristically understated. He had seen an opportunity. He had taken it. For his service across these campaigns, he was awarded the Military Cross and Bar, one of Britain's highest military decorations. He was now, without question, the most eccentric, effective combat officer in the British Army. Then, Yugoslavia happened. Early 1944. Churchill is now a lieutenant colonel commanding commandos in support of Yugoslav partisan forces fighting the Nazi occupation. His objective, the island of Brac, off the Dalmatian coast. Intelligence suggested the Germans were building an airstrip there. The Allies needed it gone. Churchill led the assault. 42 commandos, supported by local partisans. The raid went badly from the start. German defenses were stronger than expected. The fighting was brutal and close, and then the mortars started. One shell, then another. Churchill's unit was devastated. Man after man went down, killed, wounded, out of the fight. Within minutes, the entire team was neutralized, all except one. Churchill stood in the wreckage and took stock. He was alone, surrounded. His ammunition was gone. There was nothing left to fight with, no way to escape, no reinforcements coming. And so he did the only thing left to do. He sat down among the dead and wounded. He picked up his bagpipes, and he played "Will Ye No Come Back Again," a Scottish lament, into the darkness. The Germans, completely bewildered, crept closer through the smoke, trying to understand what they were hearing. A grenade detonated nearby. The shockwave threw Churchill unconscious. When he woke up, he was a prisoner. The Germans flew him to Berlin for interrogation. His captors, noting his surname, assumed he must be a relation of Winston Churchill. He was not. But they weren't taking chances. He was sent not to a standard POW camp, but to Sachsenhausen, a concentration camp north of Berlin. Sachsenhausen was not a place people left. It held political prisoners, spies, foreign nationals the Reich considered high value. The security was serious. The conditions were brutal. Jack Churchill treated it as a logistical challenge. He and a Royal Air Force officer located an abandoned drain running under the perimeter fence. They spent weeks preparing, and then, one night they crawled through it, under the wire, through the dark, out the other side. They walked for days through forests, moving only at night, stealing vegetables from farms, jumping freight trains when they could. Churchill had sprained his ankle during the escape but didn't complain, just kept walking. They made it almost to the Baltic coast, nearly to the sea. They were recaptured near the city of Rostock, just miles from freedom. Churchill was transferred to a POW camp in the Austrian Tyrol, a different facility, heavier security. He waited. In April 1945, the camp's floodlights failed. A power outage, brief, unplanned. Churchill walked away from a work detail and disappeared into the darkness. He crossed the Alps on foot, navigating the Brenner Pass. He stole vegetables from Austrian gardens and cooked them in a small tin can he'd been hiding for months. He walked for 8 days on a sprained ankle, covering roughly 93 miles. On the 8th day, hobbling along a road in northern Italy, he spotted a column of armored vehicles in the distance. White stars on the hulls. American. He flagged them down, scruffy, half-starved, ankle ruined, and introduced himself as a British colonel. They believed him. The war in Europe was, by this point, almost over. Churchill was transferred to Burma, where the fighting against Japan was still fierce. He arrived, ready, and then 2 atomic bombs. Japan surrendered. The Second World War was over. Churchill's reported reaction when he heard the news was this: "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years." He was almost certainly joking. Almost. In 1948, he was posted to British Palestine during the final chaotic months of the Mandate. He was one of the first on the scene when Arab forces ambushed a Jewish medical convoy in Jerusalem. 78 doctors, nurses, students, and patients killed in a burning convoy on a narrow road. Churchill had been ordered to stay out of it. He ignored that order, walked toward the ambush, calmly, smiling, carrying a walking stick, and later coordinated the evacuation of 700 Jewish doctors, students, and patients from the Hadassah Hospital on Mount Scopus. He spent his final years of service teaching at a military academy in Australia, where he discovered surfing. He mastered it to design his own board, and upon returning to England, became the first person to surf the tidal bore of the River Severn. He retired in 1959 as a lieutenant colonel with 2 distinguished service orders and a military cross and bar. In retirement, he bought and restored steam launches on the Thames. He sailed them between Richmond and Oxford. He collected radio-controlled model ships, and every day on the train home from his brief and deeply unsatisfying office job, he would pick up his briefcase, lean out the window, and throw it into someone's garden, because he couldn't stand carrying it. He died in Surrey on March 8, 1996. He was 89 years old. Here is what history chose to remember about the Second World War. The generals, the politicians, the turning points, Normandy, Stalingrad, the bomb. And here is what history forgot. A man who showed up to the most mechanized, industrialized, dehumanizing conflict in human history with a longbow and a broadsword, and somehow made it work. Who fought on 6 fronts, escaped captivity twice, and when it was all over, felt mainly that it had ended too soon. Jack Churchill didn't fit the war he was given. He was a medieval knight dropped into the 20th century by some cosmic mistake, and he spent his entire life just dealing with that. He never got a statue. He never got a film. He got a nickname, Mad Jack, that reduced a man of extraordinary skill, courage, and defiant humanity to a punchline. But here's the thing about Mad Jack Churchill. He wouldn't have cared. He was too busy winning wars.